Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today's Cultivating Success webinar is on getting started with CSA, which is Community Supported Agriculture. Cultivating Success is a partnership of University of Idaho Extension, the nonprofit Small Acreage Farming Organization Rural Roots, and the Washington State University Food Systems Program. A couple of webinar tips. With everybody on their computers and working from home these days, you might experience that your Wi-Fi bandwidth is a little bit narrow. So we do recommend that you close all of the other programs running on your computer. If you have any problems with your sound, you can also call in on your telephone. If you decide to do that, go ahead and mute your computer so you don't get any feedback. At any time during the webinar, you can type questions in for our speaker into the question box, or you can type in questions related to technical assistance into the chat. If you registered by 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, I did send you the slide handouts for today's webinar by email. They will also be available for downloading with the webinar recording from the Cultivating Success website. Today's presenter is Ariel Agenbroad. She's a community food systems and small farms extension educator with the University of Idaho, and she is located in Ada County, so Boise, and serves the Treasure Valley. I am Colette DePhelps. I will be your moderator today. I am a community food systems area educator up here in the Northern District, located in Moscow. With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and ask Ariel to take over the presentation.
All right, hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. I'm very excited to be presenting to you all today. I do love teaching in person most of all, but the great thing about webinar is that I get to be teaching folks all over the state that normally I wouldn't get to see or interact with. So yes, today we are going to be talking about getting started with CSA. And it may be a great time to present this as some of you are looking for different ways to market your produce with the changes to the way that markets have been run due to COVID-19. But in any case, I hope that we're going to be able to address many of the early challenges, considerations, and questions related to community-supported agriculture. So we're going to talk about today on this webinar, we're going to define CSA. We'll talk a little bit about what might bring us here today, some of your different motivations for wanting to explore CSA as a marketing strategy. We'll look at some of the more common and the less common models of CSA. We'll give you some questions to help you determine if CSA is the right choice for you and your farm. We'll determine some of your farm goals for CSA, or at least get you started thinking about what your farm goals would be and how they relate to this form of marketing. And then I'm going to introduce you to some practical planning tools that you can use if you're ready to begin planning your CSA. And these tools will specifically be related to planning your fresh produce. So what is CSA? CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. You may also hear of it as subscription farming or share farming. The USDA actually defined CSA several years ago as a community of individuals pledging support to a farm operation. And this is a way in which growers and consumers provide mutual support for each other, sharing the risks and the benefits of local food production. So how does it work? Well, in most cases, members or shareholders of the farm, or CSA members, there's a lot of different ways that they are termed, they pledge or they pay in advance to cover some of the anticipated costs of the farm operation. So now, or sometimes even in late winter, customers will pick a farm that they want to support and they will pay for their share up front. And so in return, once the growing season begins and produce is coming on, they will receive shares in the farm's bounty for that season. And there is no single model of CSA. There have been so many variations based on the types of things that people are producing or growing, the types of things that customers are wanting, So there's a lot of different ways that it can function. It's one of the most flexible forms of direct marketing. So I wanted to share a little bit about my personal experience with CSA and why it's something that's so close to my heart, why I love talking about it. And actually, it was really fun to get ready for this webinar because I got to go back through some materials that I haven't visited in a while and relive some really special memories to me. So as Colette said, I am an area extension educator in community food systems and small farms. I have to say that this is my dream job, and I could only have imagined that this is what I would end up getting to do when I started my educational journey. I started with a BS in agriculture and extension education in 2005 at the University of Idaho. And it looks like I took this off of my slide somehow by accident, but then I also pursued a master's degree in horticulture and plant science at U of I and graduated in 2007. And my graduate work involved being the farm manager for the University of Idaho Student Organic Farm in Moscow, and in helping to develop and to strengthen their CSA program. And in the meantime, learned pretty much everything I possibly could from everyone around me on how to do a CSA. And I found a lot of deficiencies in information and resources, and so I had to invent them. And that's some of the things that I'm going to share with you today. So I want to take you back longer than I even care to admit, back to the Stewards Farm in 2006, where some of this work began. So it was a 3-acre campus farm. It was certified organic in 2006. We did maintain that certification for a few years. The farm site has since changed locations, and I am not 100% positive if they're still pursuing certification or not. It was managed entirely by students, volunteers, and then some of us actually were able to pay ourselves during the summer through our CSA. That was another motivation that I had. I had no graduate assistantship and no grants, so I had to figure out how to make this work. Our produce was marketed through a CSA, through farm to school and campus farm stand. It had been going on a couple years when I came into this role, and we had some of these relationships already started. Our CSA season up in Moscow in northern Idaho was about July through November, which I know a lot of the growers in Moscow have a much longer, better season than that, but for many reasons, we were not quite up to that level. We were pretty ambitious. We enrolled 65 individuals in our 2006 CSA on a 1/4 acre in production. And we were able to deliver that. I will give you the spoiler alert right now, but there was a lot to be learned along the way. And so this was where our farm was. It was out, just out the Troy Highway. Beautiful, beautiful location. I still dream about this soil. Now that I'm living in the Treasure Valley, it's a little bit different. I love our growing season, but I miss that soil. And then we had about that 1/4 acre in production. The rest of the farm was research projects for other graduate students studying organic agriculture. And we were all, when I look at these pictures, I can't believe how young we were, how cute we were. We sure had a great time, and we had so much energy. I couldn't imagine doing some of this now. So my hat is off to all of you farmers for this kind of work. The Soil Stewards Farm today is still thriving. More resources have been put towards it, including actual paid staff to help organize the educational components and the research. I'm very excited to watch their progress. And I was so happy to see that this year they are, in fact, offering a CSA again for 2020. They're going to be able to do a 20-week CSA. And if you are in the Moscow area and you don't have a CSA picked out, or your CSA is full and somebody's asking you, let them know about this. Great learning experience. All right, so that's some of my background and why I have some of the materials that I have. So the CSA model, there are many variations on the theme of CSA. In general, most CSAs are associated with fresh vegetables, but they could also involve fruit, proteins, so eggs, dairy, or meat, value-added products like baked goods, jams, jellies, pickles, other things like that, and even cut flowers. So they can either involve all of those things together, or they might just be just a meat CSA or just a flour CSA. So it really is an all-inclusive category for farm products that are direct marketed on a subscription or share basis. They can either be farmer or shareholder driven. So We don't see a lot of shareholder-driven CSAs in Idaho. Most of those examples are in other parts of the country. I do know of one, at least, that's part of a planned neighborhood here in the Treasure Valley, where the neighbors came together and they said, okay, in our subdivision, which is outside of Boise, we have this access to land, and we would like to have a farmer grow food for us. And so they have a farm position that's filled by a local farmer who farms that ground, and then everyone in that neighborhood has the option to purchase a share. The other more common version is the farmer-driven CSA, where the farmer determines what they're going to provide, and then they go out seeking shareholders. So it can go either way. They can be certified organic or not. It really just depends on what that farm is doing, what the values of their consumers are, and what they're asking for. So it does not necessarily signify that the farm is organic or not, though many CSA farms do capitalize on their either organic or certified naturally grown status, or in their growing practices being sustainable. That can often be a really strong marketing pitch. They can be seasonal or year-long. Here in Idaho, we don't have a lot of examples of year-round CSAs. We do have some producers that are able to provide value-added products or to collaborate with local producers of breads, cheeses, and preserved foods, so that they can provide an off-season or a winter CSA for those kinds of things. But most of our fresh fruit and vegetable CSAs are going to be seasonal, just based on our climate and the fact that we don't have a lot of year-round production. In the Treasure Valley, that is typically because water is seasonal, and while we could probably extend the season, we don't always have the resources to keep crops watered year-round, or the energy to heat those greenhouses. So this is another aspect that has historically been part of CSA, involving shareholder labor or working or volunteering for your share. However, in most cases, this is not actually legal in the state of Idaho. So if that's something that you're thinking about, you might want to maybe talk to somebody in Extension, Colette or I. We can walk you through what some of the Department of Labor regulations are about volunteers or about work for trade. So I just want to let you know that on the books, this is not probably something that is really going to be allowed. So you might just want to think about that a little bit. I'm sure it still happens though. And then if you're looking at the cost or the price, looking at Idaho CSAs right now, the average is $300 to $600 per share or more, depending on the location, the number of weeks, and the size of the share offered. So what are some of the benefits of CSA? Why might you be looking at this as a marketing strategy right now? Well, one that didn't actually make it on this list, but I'm thinking about in terms of COVID-19, is that it could be a very low contact, low touch type of interaction with your customer. So if your market has been delayed, postponed, canceled, if you're normally a farmer's market vendor and your customers are still looking for your food, CSA might be a way to comply with some of the recommendations for social distancing and contact, and still get that food out to people without having to have an online sales model or some other things that you may not be ready to do yet. One of the great benefits of CSA to farmers is that access to upfront early operating capital. So if your shareholders are buying their shares in late winter or early spring, you're getting the money that you need to fix your hoop houses and to buy seeds and to get implements and to get started, or maybe hire a little bit of labor or heat your greenhouses. The one detriment is that your money comes then, and then months and months later in August, you're not having income coming in directly from the CSA. So it does mean that you've got to be careful about your budgeting and managing that cash flow, but it does mean that the money comes in ahead of time. And I also want to point out that that is a big risk for the customer, that if they're going to take their money early in the season, really be prepared to give them produce later on. All right. So unlike some direct marketing strategies like your farmer's market or some other things or sales to restaurants, you can structure this very much to fit the farm and you, the farmer. So, Saturday markets, that is obviously going to be held on a Saturday every weekday, week in and week out. If you have some reason that that's not going to work for you, you can use your CSA to really work around your quality of life and what you want to do and what you want to produce. So it does give you a little bit more freedom and flexibility sometimes, and the ability just to determine what's going to work. Lots of flexibility, like I said. It can also be your lead enterprise, or it can supplement other marketing strategies. So you may have a farmer's market booth, which keeps you out there in the public eye, which helps you kind of keep track of trends and be part of that visibility. But you may also have a CSA for your regular customers, so they don't have to deal with going to market and picking out what they want, and you might be out of it. However, they could always pick up their CSA at farmers markets. Some folks do that. So some challenges with CSA. It's not for everybody, and it's not perfect, obviously. Beginning and managing a CSA is not always recommended for your first time out of the gate, right? You're brand new to farming. You don't even have a production season under your belt, and you're going to launch into this. So when we were working with the Soil Stewards Farm, I spent most of the 2005 season observing what the farm was capable of, what the farm had been producing, some of the practices, so that I had an idea of how we would be able to have a pretty successful CSA the next year. But it really took that, that practice year to know that, that we were going to be able to do this. And part of this reason is because, vegetable farming, specialty crop farming, it is complex and there are no guarantees and things can happen. And if you start out taking money from your friends and neighbors and community members and you can't deliver, yes, there is that inferred risk with joining a CSA, but I guarantee you that they are expecting to get something out of the deal. And if you don't deliver, they may be forgiving, but they're certainly probably not going to buy a CSA from you again. So for managing your risk and also just for getting your production skills in order, it's not the best thing to start out with. And that's partly because too, meeting those shareholder demands, knowing that you're going to have enough food at the right times and the right variety does require some careful planning and timing. If you've been growing for many years and you've got the growing down, then it might just be working out the timing and the planning. But if you're brand new to all of it, it really is going to provide some challenges. And also you must have a supportive customer base. So if you are really remote, you may have more of a challenge finding customers, or you might have to get creative with how you reach those customers. And it does require a great deal of organization, communication, and production skill, because you are communicating with your customers, you are organizing your shares, you're doing all the work, and you're growing the vegetables. And so it's a juggling act, and there are a lot of moving parts with CSA. So is it right for you? How would you determine this? So I've got a checklist here. And if you can check most of these off, then CSA may be a really good choice for you and your farm. So first of all, do you have experience in producing high quality, consistent products? No matter what it is that you want to grow and sell, whether it's vegetables, fruit, meat, cheese, flowers, you know how to grow it, and you know you can grow really nice stuff. You have a community that is potentially interested in CSA. You could determine this through a number of different ways. You could survey your farmers market customers. You could go around your neighborhood and put out flyers. You could put out a request on Nextdoor or Facebook, or however it is that you're engaging with potential customers. Do you feel like there's an interest out there and that folks would support it? There may be other CSAs in your community, but the market is not yet saturated. For a little while in the Treasure Valley, it did seem like we had a saturated CSA market, but our community has grown so much, I think that there is potential for other farms to enter the CSA realm. So here's another one too, and this is not going to be something you may be able to answer automatically until you start doing some analysis, but do you have enough land, water, and labor resources to start and to be able to grow a CSA to meet your income goals? So your income is going to be based on the number of shares minus your inputs into that operation. And so you're eventually going to be limited from growing those available resources. So here's a few others to consider. Do you enjoy working with people? Now, yes, you can be less of a people person and be successful with CSA than you could probably at a farmer's market booth, but there is still going to be a lot of customer service that comes with a CSA, even if it's not directly face-to-face. So are you a good communicator? Are you going to be able to let people know what's coming in their share, where to get their share, how to troubleshoot problems, how to accept constructive criticism? Because I will tell you that CSA shareholders, they take that owning a piece of the farm really seriously, and they're going to tell you when they're not happy with something. And hopefully they tell you and not somebody else, and then it gets back to you third hand. Are you capable of planning for and attaining specific yield quantities to meet the demands of a CSA as promised? And this is what I'm going to go into in the last half of the webinar with the planning tools that were developed. And then do you have a backup market in case you are really good at growing and you have way more produce than you need for your CSA? Where's that going to go? And then on the flip side, if suddenly you have total crop failure in tomatoes, how are you going to meet that demand? Do you have a backup supply? Do you have another grower you can work with? In many cases, CSAs are a shared effort, and it's not just from one farm. So think about that. Do you have a plan for if you grow too much and a plan if you grow too little? And what are you going to do about that? And then last, have you researched the legalities and liabilities of this type of enterprise? Again, if you're just getting started out and you're small scale, there aren't a whole lot of rules and restrictions and regulations to work through, but you certainly do need to have your ducks in a row in terms of potentially having some liability insurance, making sure that, that if there are any permits or licenses required for the kinds of things you want to grow, especially if you get into meats and proteins, that you've researched it, that you're doing everything right, and that you're legal and above board. And that goes for any enterprise that you might be planning. So when I was planning our CSA, I spent a lot of time interviewing the farmers around the Palouse region and down in the Treasure Valley who I knew had good success with CSAs. And here were some things that they told me over and over again. Talk to other growers, right? Find out what is working for them. Find out if they started CSA and they stopped CSA, what were those reasons? If they continue to offer a CSA, you know, what are they doing that has been really successful? And one of the things I love so much about small scale growers in Idaho is that many of them are so willing to share and talk to you about what they're doing and to help you be successful. Do think though, if you're talking to someone for a lot of time and you're asking them for some of their secrets and tips, you might want to think about compensating them in some way for that time and expertise, because they're saving you years of, of bad decisions by giving you their good advice. All of them said start really small. You know, some folks said, I'm just going to feed one family and see what that looks like, you know, out of my garden, and see if I can give them what they need, and they're going to give me really honest feedback because maybe they're a relative or they're a neighbor, and they'll tell me very straightforward, you know, what they do and don't like about this. And another tip in there that was related to that was start a season at farmers market and see what people buy, how much of it they buy, what they tend to come back for, what they get tired of, and keep notes of that because it's really valuable market research. As much as you can, diversify your crops and your products so that customers aren't getting the same thing week in and week out. There may be some things that they love to eat every week, but there might be some things, and I'll talk about this at the very end, where they say, okay, enough is enough. I don't want any more of that. Explore some additional marketing outlets. And this is always a good advice, just so that you're diversifying your risk, right? You're not putting all of your proverbial or your literal eggs in one basket, and you've got some backup for if things change. And this year would certainly be an example of that, and a really tough one, because we'd often tell people diversify your markets by selling to wholesale and restaurants and farmers markets. Well, two of those just got completely knocked out and wholesale probably too, since most of those would be going to restaurants. So really think about as many ways as you can diversify your marketing without spreading yourself too thin. And then build relationships with other growers. Like I said, if it turns out that you have crop failure and you need to support your crops, it'd be great to know that you can have a supply from someone else and that you could share back and forth across that and collaborate when possible. Small farms are always, I think, more successful and more resilient when they've networked with each other and when they have a support system. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, looking at those beautiful radishes. Down here, it's almost time to start harvesting radishes, and probably some folks are that got them going in their hoop houses. All right, so we're going to move into some of the planning and assessment part of this. So I'm going to talk about assessing your resources and your limitations, right? Because I said that your ability to generate profit through CSA is going to be limited by land, your labor and time, your available water, the community interest and ability to support a CSA, your production experience and expertise, your climate, and potentially even transportation. So all of these things could impact your ability to offer a CSA and to offer a large enough CSA to meet your income goals, right? Because there's only so much you can grow on land. There's only so much time in the day and available labor. Your community really has to be able to step up with the funds to do this. Your production experience is going to come into play when you try to grow a lot of different things. Your climate may dictate your season to some extent. And then transportation, the ability to get food to where it needs to go, is also going to be a factor. So these things are all what should go into part of your planning. How do you know how to set your season length? So typically in Idaho, like I said, our CSAs are offered spring through fall. And then if you have access to season extension like hoop houses, high tunnels, or greenhouses, you may be able to extend that season several weeks or months on either end if you have the ability to heat and or irrigate in those structures, and also depending on your, your expertise and skill with working in those structures. And like I did say, some are going to fill in with extras like honey, eggs, cheese, other agricultural products, flowers, bread, preserved foods if they have them. So that might be how you determine how long your season is going to be. And then also too, how long do you want to be actively packing and distributing shares? So that's something to consider also. So as far as share options, some growers are going to choose to offer multiple sizes. They might just offer one size, and typically one size does not fit all because you have families of 6 that eat lots and lots of vegetables, and you have one person who loves vegetables but really just can't eat that much food in 1 week. So you may consider having different sizes like a whole share, a half share, a family, a couple, or a single share. However, I'm going to get to some caveats for that in just a second. How much food are you going to provide for people? Are you going to provide all the vegetables they could possibly eat in 1 week if they were cooking 3 meals at home? Or are you going to provide them with just a few things to add to their meals? And this is what I was going to mention, is that if you do offer multiple sizes, what we found in our CSA, we offered bushel sizes, which were like a family size, and we offered a peck size, which was basically like a half share or would be a good amount of food for a couple. We found that the time and labor spent preparing those different sizes was just about equal. Because there wasn't that much less in the half share, and it still took the same time in harvesting and cleaning and packing them into bags and weighing the produce. And so really the smaller share price should have actually been a little bit more to counteract that, because we did feel like we were potentially losing money by doing it that way. Of course, it all depends on how you pack and distribute your shares too, but just something to think about. Some CSAs are delivered, some CSAs are picked up. Again, that's going to be determined by what you are comfortable with or what is legal on your property. If you want people coming to the farm to pick it up, or if you want to bring it to a drop-off place. If so, how many times a week, how many hours, how will that work? And then how will your shares be conveyed? And by this, I mean, are they going to be in boxes or bags? Are they going to be pre-packed? Or like I've seen in some farms, the shoppers create their own CSA based on what is available and laid out for them. So kind of like going down a market booth table and saying, okay, I'll take beets and kale and chard and onions today. And then the next person comes through and picks up what they want. This is going to be a lot harder to plan for because you may end up with more than you needed of some things and you might be out of other things. So think about that too. And then the webinar that's later today, if you're watching this live, is going to be some safe handling and packing practices, especially related to COVID-19. So that might be something that will help you determine what the best means of conveyance is for your CSA shares. How many shares are you going to offer, right? This is where we start getting into the numbers. And this is not something that is easy to determine. And this is actually what took me 2 years of my graduate work to come up with. Some of you might be brighter than I am and just can kind of come up with this right away, but I'm going to walk you through how I figured it out. So you need to know how much food your land can produce. You need to have an idea a little bit of how much produce your individual shareholders or your families are going to require. And then you want to know what maybe some of your income goals are. And then these three things together, put them in the blender, shake them up, and hopefully you come out with a magic number. And how do you set your price for your CSA shares? So if you look at some current information on American spending, the USDA estimates that US households spend anywhere from $6 to $21 a week on fresh produce, depending on multiple factors. So these have to do primarily with income and access to fresh food, and then sometimes too just the values of those consumers. So it's a pretty big range, $6 to $21, and that is actually fruits and vegetables combined. And on average, US households spend more on fresh fruits per week than they do on fresh vegetables. So this is combined, and the $6 to the $21 is anywhere from households making $15,000 a year to households earning over $200,000 a year. So no matter how much money folks have, they're not spending a whole lot of it on fresh fruits and vegetables. But again, that is the average. And typically your CSA customer is not your average consumer. Most CSA shares actually work out to being about $10 to $40 a week. But you think about this, this is usually not for the entire year. It's during the time when fresh produce is at its peak. The value of that produce, if you were to look at the equivalent value of certified organic or local produce through other avenues, that is going to add to that. And then even depending on, but regardless of income level, most people that are seeking out a CSA share have a strong commitment to buying local, and they also have a strong interest in eating vegetables. And I did want to point out, I don't think I have it anywhere in the slides, but that there are programs out there, and it may be possible for you to tap into either SNAP benefits or other matching programs, or to have CSA shares sponsored by philanthropic organizations in order to provide shares to low-income individuals. So we've seen that happening in the Treasure Valley. We've seen organizations buying a CSA for a daycare, for example, or issuing vouchers to families in need so that they can buy a CSA share. So there are ways to make CSA available to more people. And so your share price also can target a specific audience, or it can reflect current markets. But in every community, it's going to be a little bit different what your customers are willing and able to pay, what they will pay, and what they perceive as the value of that share. And so it's really good idea to try to come up with what the average market value of your share might be. And this might not be able to be done really ahead of time when you don't know exactly what's going to be in your shares. So what it comes down to, the bottom line, when you are looking at the finances of CSA, what does it cost your farm to produce a share, and what are your financial goals? And these should be the driving factors. And then the other pieces will work out through a number of means. So yes, we have to do the math. If you're not familiar with enterprise budgets are a way to pick an enterprise. So in this case, it would be fresh fruits and vegetables sold CSA. You would work out some of your fixed and variable costs for doing that on your farm. And then you also need to spend some time doing some math on production plan. This is what we're going to spend the rest of the time with today. Predicting the need of your customers, predicting the potential yield from your farm, scheduling your planting and harvest so that you know when you're going to be able to deliver, record keeping, I cannot emphasize that enough, and then the ability to come back and make adjustments, right? Planning your production, right? How much do people eat, right? And how much do they buy? And what are they going to do with it? So how much do I need to plant to meet my goals of feeding that many people? And how much food can I fit on my farm once I know how much people need to eat? So these were really key questions that I had going into planning a CSA. And like I said, I didn't have a lot of answers to this. So I developed a series of Excel planning spreadsheets to help me work through this. And so again, this was originally developed as part of my graduate work a few years ago, but it has been adapted over the years and tested and tried by multiple farmers. And so the reason that I came up with these is I wanted a way to predict some per capita vegetable needs. I wanted to know what people in general, what's at least a starting place, right? So I looked at USDA vegetable consumption data from the 1970s through the present. I looked through local, regional, and national publications from all different kinds of sources. And then I did some interviews with local growers who marketed through CSA and Farmers Market to find out what they were typically putting in a share and what people were eating. And so I was able to come up with some estimates. The next thing is that I needed to know what my needs were paired with what average yield that we were going to grow, right? So we might know that we need 100 pounds of broccoli, but what does that look like? And how much space am I going to need to produce 100 pounds of broccoli to meet the needs of those, 20 people or whatever? So there were actually, this was a little bit easier to find, but not really localized. So there were a lot of sources of information on the yields per acre or per 100-foot row. Even the Johnny's catalog is a great place for finding some estimates of that. But the other thing to keep in mind is that most of these averages are going to be compiled from commercial operations in varying climates and different production systems. So they might be from the Midwest, or they might be from, Western Washington. They're going to be probably more from places that have really large scale vegetable operations. So all of these things have to be taken with a grain of salt. And then the other thing to remember is that if you are transitioning to organic or you're just starting out, your yields may be considerably lower than what is typically predicted for conventional, at least until you've built up your soil and you've got your rotations and your fertility really figured out. So here's an example of the table. And if you signed up for the webinar, it was emailed to you. And if you're watching this recorded, it is going to be listed alongside the recording of this webinar. So this is an Excel table. And it's built so that it'll automatically recalculate these numbers when you input how many CSA members, bed lengths, and buffer percentages you want. So I don't know if you can see me moving my mouse or not, but up here in this top green box, you've got the how many members do you expect in your CSA. So this is individual persons, right? So I can use these worksheets when I'm teaching gardening classes too. It's like, okay, I have a family of 5. I'm just going to put 5 up in that box, right? And as soon as you do that, it's going to change the calculations of a number of these vegetables that are in this chart. And it goes past broccoli. I just took a screenshot of just down to here. And it's going to recalculate this out. So based on the per capita consumption, other recommendations came out to about a pound per person of arugula is a good start. Okay, I like a lot more arugula than that. Some people like a lot less arugula than that. So again, these are starting places. You may know your customers better. You may know that they want arugula for 6 weeks. Well, then that's going to probably be closer to, 4 pounds or 5 pounds per person. But these are just some starting places, okay? So 3 pounds of broccoli per person, 5 pounds of beets, 3 pounds of beans, right? These are just the starting places. And every time I input how many people I want to feed, it's going to automatically recalculate that in this column. So for 15 people, I'm going to need to produce 15 pounds of arugula. Well, how am I going to do that? Okay, well, what I did was I used that yield data. Whoops, sorry, I meant to go back. So I used the yield data available to figure out that that 16 feet of row or 15 feet of row was actually going to produce about 15 pounds of arugula. There was about a pound per foot of row produced. So that means that 15 feet of row is what I would need for 15 people. Now let's say I want to give myself a safety buffer, either because I am new to growing arugula, I know that I have a problem with flea beetles, whatever, or maybe I also want to market my arugula in a different way. So I'm going to add a 10% buffer. And again, you can add that up here, right? You can change that to a 30% buffer or a 10% buffer, or a 4% buffer, and that's going to change that number here, right? And then also my feet of row, if my garden beds are 100 feet long, that's going to tell me the 100 feet of row. If my garden beds are 25 feet long, I can change that number as well, and that's going to calculate out here, all right? But based on 100 feet row beds, a 10% buffer, and 15 people, right, I'm going to have to plant a 17th of a 100-foot row in order to grow that much arugula, okay? And so that would be about 16 bed feet. And however you want to lay that out, in single rows, in grids, in raised boxes, that is all up to you how to do that, okay? So I just wanted to show you an example of those numbers changing. I wasn't brave enough to stop sharing the PowerPoint and actually go into Excel on the live, because things just happen technologically that I can't control. So here's just an example. Now we've changed the CSA to 200 members. Our garden beds are 60 feet, and we need a 20% buffer because we're just really unsure how this is all going to work. All right. So now I'm going to need 200 pounds of arugula. I'm going to need 200 row feet. And in my garden, that means I'm going to need 4 60-foot rows to feed those 200 people arugula. And you can see it also calculated it for the basil, the beets, the bok choy, et cetera, and it all did it automatically. So this was something that I really felt like helped us a lot, because we didn't have to go through and figure this out by hand for every crop. Now, you would want to go back and go through these numbers though, and really think about if my recommendations for pound per person are realistic for your audience. Your audience might not like beets. They might like arugula a lot more. So, and you might not choose to grow bok choy. So they're really customizable. Now there are two tables though. There's this, the first one is crops that are typically calculated by pounds of yield required per person. These are often individual, you know, they're seeded plants. The next one, this is just how it made more sense to us, is that we have crops that are calculated by the plants required per person. In my research, I saw that there was a vast discrepancy in those recommendations. Some recommendations said plant this many feet per person, and some said plant this many plants per person. So I just went with both. So a lot of these are a lot of things that we typically grow by transplants, with the exception of potatoes. And so this is actually plants per person rather than feet of row per person, but it still is going to give us at the end how many feet of row we're going to need based on that, right? And then, oops, so I go in back, and let's just look. Let's say eggplant, if I'm feeding 15 people, I need 4 plants. And that's going to give us, in yield, 50 feet. I mean, 50 pounds of eggplant is going to feed the many people that we need. And if we upped that to our 200 members CSA, right, now it is calculated out that we're going to need quite a bit more to feed 200 people. So anyway, I encourage you to play around with that and see if some of those things work for you. And I'm always open to suggestions of how they can be better, because records are really a living, record keeping is a living prospect and job. So there were a few other tools developed, which I'm happy to share with you if you get through my Excel tables and you're like, these aren't horrible, I could use something else that this woman made. So I do have a seed requirement calculation chart, because one other thing I found is that seed is sold in ounces, in grams, in pounds, and by the piece. And it makes it almost impossible to do a consistent seed order. So I made a seed chart calculation that based on the number of row feet you want to plant, it automatically gives you your seed needs in ounces, grams, and pounds, so that no matter how it's being sold in the catalog, you can order the right amount. We also have some really elaborate production schedule templates that we probably even ourselves didn't completely use because I had so much information in there. And then we also had some harvest and CSA record forms, which that again is something that you can come up with on your own fairly simply. Here's just an example of those record keeping charts. They were just printed out, and we had one for every week, and we just filled them out on paper, and then we transferred them to a computer later. Some of you are probably already using apps that help you do this really quickly from the field. No matter how you're doing it, I just really think it's important that you keep some of these records, especially maybe in your first season or two of CSA. So we would keep track of everything we harvested in the pounds or bunches that were harvested. And then we also kept a sheet of what went into every week's share so that we knew what was going in week by week, and we could look back on the season as a whole and see, okay, what went into those July shares and what went into those October shares. So why do we want to keep such detailed records, especially in the beginning? Well, you know, I had a twofold goal. I had to be able to report on this for to earn my degree, but it also really helped us to provide more accurate values in terms of those expected yields. Because remember, I said that most of your expected yield information is really general and meant for averages in the United States, not your specific growing region. And so, for example, our soil stewards crops really produced only about 53% of that expected yield. So I'm really impressed that we managed to feed all the people in our CSA when we did not have a really big buffer, and we were only getting 53% expected yield. But it also let us see that that wasn't across the board. Like, for example, we did get 80% of our expected yield for summer squash. We were real good at growing summer squash. We actually were better at growing bok choy than national averages, 13% higher. And then our cucumber was also higher than our predicted average. And so it allowed me to generate this graph at the end where the light gray bars are the predicted yield based on those planning tables. And then the black bars are where our farm, where we produced, right, over our season. So you can see, yes, it's the Palouse and hot peppers, really, really low. But even our broccoli was really, really low. Bok choy was higher, and beets were low. Our cucumbers, for some reason, were very successful. Summer squash was pretty good, and pumpkins were also pretty good. But you can see a lot of places where we fell pretty short, right? So we were able to attribute those low yields that we had an early killing frost on September 14th that we weren't prepared for. We also had consistent night temperatures that were very low. And then we had a lot of human error, you know, delays in planting. We prepared the soil poorly in some cases. We overwatered or underwatered, et cetera. And I mean, partly this is because the farm was run by a bunch of young people who were also going to school full time and were not, you know, had not been farming for very long. And so we were always learning. And we were pretty silly at it a lot of the time, but we did okay. We still managed to grow some really beautiful produce and meet those needs of those customers. And it was really, really wonderful. All right, so just really quick, one of the other things that we did that was valuable is tracking our share value. So a couple of times per season, we would take that list of what had gone into the share, and when we go out and do some recon at our local markets, and we would figure out what that share would have cost if they'd gone to the grocery store and just purchased it, right? And this can help you to determine, are you charging too much, too little, or just right? And so we started by just looking at one of our biggest weeks when we had a lot of produce going into a share. And we looked at our half share and our bushel share, and we determined that the average value of that half share for that week was about $17.30. And remember, our average share price was $12 a week that our customers were paying. So we were giving them more than market value for what they were getting. And the same with our bushel share too, came out to about $27 worth of vegetables, and they were paying $20 a week for it. So we were giving them increased value by having the CSA. And even in our early shares in July, when it was a lot of greens and new potatoes, we were still giving them more than that. If you looked at the equivalent value, more than that $12 and $20. So I think that that was good. I feel like that meant that we were giving our customers value, but we weren't so off target that our prices were really unreasonable. So the last thing I want to talk about really quick is how important it is to communicate with your CSA members. This is something that your CSA members are buying into your farm. They're putting, they're kind of giving you that leap of faith and putting their hope in you. And the more you can communicate with them, whether it's things that are going well or things that are going bad, the stronger those relationships are going to be. And the likelihood is that they're going to return and buy a CSA from you again. So the most successful CSAs are cultivating their customers as well as their crops. And again, so this is a skill set that if you don't have naturally, you'll need to develop or find someone in your farming family or partnership who does have this skill. They need to be really clearly communicated with on what to expect from your CSA and when and how. Transparency, if things are going well, if things are not going well, don't be afraid to let them know and to let them know, what you're doing about it if there is a problem of some kind. They love hearing stories about the farm and the farmers, right? They're buying into the farm. They're a stakeholder. They want to know what happens, who's being born, what are the, radishes doing, what's happening on the farm. They love to hear those sorts of things. So some CSA farmers will do newsletters, they'll do a blog, they'll just send out emails, something so that you can share that with your customers. They also really love recipes and suggestions, especially if you're giving them foods that are new or unusual, or especially when you're giving them a lot of something, it's nice to give them more ideas for how to use it. And now with the internet and recipe blogs and you've got a few favorite cookbooks, there's no shortage of ways to help them use those foods. And then another important thing is to give them a way to give you feedback. Sometimes they can do that anonymously. You could use surveys, you could use, a postcard, something where they can tell you how they felt about the CSA experience. And I just wanted to share this one more time because I mentioned how, we were pretty low on some things in our production and pretty high on other things. And when we did our end of season survey to our members, one comment that came out from a customer was, "More beets, please," right? So we're like, yes, we get that. We understand why that was. We should have told them that we were not doing very well with beets. And honestly, the reason that happened is we had a day of service where some students came out that weren't involved with the farm. And I set them to go weed the row of beets. And they weeded it all right. There was not a plant in sight. So that cut back on our beets a little bit. Another comment was, actually came up several times from our CSA members, and that was, "We would not like to have so many cucumbers, please." And again, yes, we were overproducing cucumbers, so our shareholders got a lot of cucumbers. So it's just good to know that your customers will give you good feedback. It's usually about things that you already knew. But it helps you to plan for the future and say, okay, maybe we'll divert our cucumbers to another market so they don't get them 7 weeks in a row. All right, so a few of the other resources that we made available to you today and on the website, these are 2 publications through our university catalog. The one on the left is CSA, a marketing strategy for small acreage producers in Idaho. And that's a lot of what I've talked about today of just is a CSA right for you? Is it something you should consider? And then this publication on the other side, the seasonal eating week by week, this is really meant to be targeted to a potential CSA customer. So this is something that you could even print out and hand out to potential CSA customers to help them understand what CSA means, why they probably won't get tomatoes in their shares in May, and why they will get a lot of summer squash in September, among other things. But it also really just helps to explain the concept. Another book that I did not put in my slides, but I wanted to make sure and mention, is a book called Sharing the Harvest by Elizabeth Henderson and Robin Van En, and it's published by Chelsea Green. It's a wonderful book, and I found it very valuable to me during my work, and I know a lot of other CSA farmers love it too. And then last thing is the State Department of Agriculture every couple of years tries to put out a CSA guide. So if you are trying to find new customers and you want to share your information with the State Department of Agriculture, they can put you on the CSA guide, and it's a brochure that they have available on their website. And I included that in the handouts too, so that you can see. This might also help you if you're new to CSA to identify a farmer to approach maybe as a mentor or as someone to talk to about this strategy. All right, so that's all I had prepared today. I just wanted to remind you that through Cultivating Success, we're always trying to help small acreage farmers find appropriate strategies for marketing their products to help them with production issues, financial planning, whole farm planning, etc. And I really thank you for letting me share my enthusiasm and my resources about CSA with you today.
Thank you, Ariel. We do have a question that has come in, and this is related to the part of the presentation where you were talking about how smaller shares take just about as much time to put together as a bigger family size share. So the question is, has anyone tried using one size box to standardize the time it takes to prepare the boxes, but giving the bigger families or the bigger shares like 3 boxes instead of 1 box?
Oh, that's a really great idea. And I don't know if somebody has done that. I'm sure that though that after a few seasons of realizing that you're spending the same amount of time to do something that you're getting half the money for, you would come up with a system, and that sounds like a great idea to do. So that you just know you're making 50 boxes, but 3 of those boxes might be part of 1 share. I like that a lot. That's really interesting.
And then it seems, Ariel, in the crop planning, you would be planning that you were doubling because those boxes would need to have the same exact product in them, so you didn't have to track them individually.
Oh, say that one more time.
So, for instance, when I get my CSA share, if I'm buying a large share, I might have a more diversity of products in that large box than I do in the smaller box.
Right.
But in
And
this
so
situation, if you're just making 100 boxes that are all the same, but some families are getting 3, then if you put 1 cucumber in every box, they're getting 3 cucumbers. So
correct.
thinking about how much is going to each share would have to be part of your crop plan.
Right. And so the way that I did those crop planning sheets was based on an individual eater, right? So therefore, if we say that when we said that our bushel shares had 4 people, we were factoring in 4 individuals into that chart, and our half shares were 2 people. So if we did it by a per person, it was a lot easier to calculate that than based on how many families, because then that number is variable. So that might be, that's one reason that we did it by person. And then so our CSA was 65 individuals, but we had like 30 CSA shares that we sold. It was just broken up either by 2 people or 4 people in those shares, if that makes any sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Absolutely. We didn't have any other questions that have come in, so thank you for that great presentation. And if you'll stop sharing your screen, I will share mine, and I will show folks where they'll be able to find the recording and additional resources.
Great. And I just wanted to point out that those tables are still a work in progress, and I would love it if you give them a try. If you've got questions or you find some functionality errors, or if you find a way to improve them, let me know, because I have been trying this whole time to get them ready to actually put out into a publication for the university, and I would love a little bit more real world testing of them.
Great. Thank you. And so you all probably saw that Ariel's email is ariel@uidaho.edu. So easy to remember and get a hold of her. On your screen, you see a picture of the Cultivating Success website. If you go to this light blue button, Recorded Webinars, that's where you're going to find the link to go to this webinar and all of the handouts that Ariel has mentioned. I also wanted to point out that we have a new COVID-19 resource page. We're updating that regularly, and it's very extensive, specifically for small farms or ranches. We also have a link to our COWS publications, where you'll find a lot of resources that will really help you in your production and farm management. We do have some upcoming webinars. At 1 o'clock Pacific today, 2 o'clock Mountain, we are having a webinar that is looking at best practices for farm deliveries, pickups, and CSAs during COVID-19. So if you're thinking of doing a CSA this season, definitely try to watch this webinar. It will be recorded and available from the Cultivating Success website, so that is another option for you. And it's going to build on very nicely to the things that Ariel talked about today. Next week, we have an introduction to backyard poultry production. That's on Tuesday, April 28th. And then on May 5th, we're going to have a presentation that's really looking at local food system businesses, so farms and value-added businesses. And as we move out of this time of quarantine and crisis, what are some of the tools and things that those businesses will need to consider as we transition back into a more normal economy and day-to-day business model? And then if you are thinking about selling your products online, we'll have a webinar on Monday, May 11th that's specific about using Etsy. We also have on our recorded webinar site a webinar about selling online and how to develop a farm store and a very simple website that gives the pros and cons of many different tools. So that might be something that you want to integrate into your planning for your CSA, is how are you going to collect money, and if you would like to do that through an online store, there are some resources available for you to think through that. We do really appreciate your feedback. If you could take a second to do our post-webinar evaluation, we would really appreciate it. The evaluation will launch in your browser as soon as we end the webinar today. It's also a link in the handout that you received, and you'll get a reminder tomorrow morning about where you can find the webinar resources and our post-webinar evaluation through your email. We hope that we get to see you on our 1 o'clock CSA Best Practices webinar, or that you're able to join us by viewing the recording. Thank you again, and have a really great afternoon.